Then by week 2, your elbows and knees start to get a little bit squeaky. So you start flexing and then you get this cracking effect, which isn't very pleasant. And then by week 3, what everybody reports is that their body is made of glass. Vigorous Steve here with another Worth It or Not. Finally! Sorry it took a little while. I usually have to prepare a ton of material and do a little bit of a deep dive into each compound separately to figure out whether they're worth taking or not. In this video, I want to discuss the designer steroids and the prohormones. There are a ton of them out there, so I won't be able to discuss all of them. I'm going to limit it to a select few that you guys have anecdotal evidence of and some anecdotal reports. On the previous video where I discussed anadrol and its metabolite mestanolone, halotestin and primobolan acetate tablets, a lot of you guys left some positive comments regarding Epistane and methyl-1-testosterone and a lot of other designer steroids and prohormones that you guys have experience with. I've done my due diligence researching most of the prohormones and the designer steroids over these last couple of weeks. Long story short, I don't think that any of them are worth taking in any way, shape, or form, considering that we have so many alternatives at our disposal. Because there are still a ton of FDA-approved pharmaceutical-grade anabolic androgenic steroids available, with a ton of clinical literature behind them, so you can do your research. And whatever is not covered by the pharmaceutical industry, you can bet your left testicle that the underground labs have these steroids on their product list. All of the steroids, at least, with some practical application. So all of the designer steroids and the prohormones that I did my research on, I don't feel that they compare or come anywhere close to what we have available through the underground labs or the pharmaceutical grade sources. Still, I'm going to do my absolute best to explain to you guys why these compounds aren't exactly worth taking. But for that, I first need to explain to you guys what the difference is between designer steroids and prohormones. Before I do, please like the video, leave a comment for the algorithm, and consider subscribing if you haven't already, and hit that notification bell button while you're at it so you can get notified when the new and improved DHEA and pregnenolone deep dive video drops. I'm almost done with it. I think I'll have it online next week. So make sure that you're subscribed with the notification bell button on. What are prohormones, or prodrugs as most of the medical community goes with? Prohormones are compounds that need to be metabolized into an active pharmaceutical ingredient, which is pharmaceutical and biologically active to potentiate its positive effects. Testosterone enanthate is a prohormone or prodrug of testosterone. Testosterone enanthate is not biologically active, but once the enanthate ester is metabolized, you're just left with testosterone, which can potentiate its effect through the androgen receptors. Androstenediol or androstenedione, which are metabolized from DHEA, dihydroepiandrosterone, ultimately metabolize into testosterone. So you can say that DHEA, androstenediol, and androstenedione are prohormones, prodrugs for testosterone. Androstenediol and androstenediol were modified into an infinitely different amounts of prohormones back in the day and were being sold over the counter at GNC or some other supplement stores in the United States, at least until the Anabolic Steroid Control Act got updated in 2012 or 2014, I believe. They were being sold as precursor prohormones for testosterone or testosterone bastardizations. Again, I put the entire list of androstenediol and androstenedione modifications on the screen so you guys can see which compounds used to be out there. Nowadays, I don't think that anybody is using them anymore because, well, testosterone is ready to come by and we have a lot of testosterone derivatives to choose from already, which are available as an injectable formula, which potentiate a lot less liver stress compared to what these prohormones do. A long story short, to make it a little bit easier to understand using bioidentical hormones, DHEA is a prodrug for 7-keto-DHEA or testosterone, whereas testosterone technically is a prodrug for estradiol, but generally speaking, we mention that estradiol is a metabolite of testosterone, whereas estradiol can metabolize into estrone or estriol through several different pathways. These are not very biologically active in men. So you would say that estrone and estriol are metabolites of estradiol, whereas DHEA can be a prodrug for a multitude of different sex hormones. So you have to look into the hormone cascade to really understand how prohormones work. You can say that dimethazine is a prohormone for superdrol. I'll explain that a little bit later in this video. Dimethazine is basically a superdrol dimer, which is linked at the third position of the A ring with an azine group, and this is what the name stands for. Dimethazine stands for dimethylsterone superdrol azine. So when this metabolizes, the dimethazine metabolizes, it creates two superdrol molecules. This is one of the few prohormones which we'll discuss in this video. It might have some practical application. I found this compound to be very fascinating because I do like my superdrol here or there. And this is actually the only prohormone on the list of classically categorized prohormones that I'm still willing to run an experiment on to see how dimethazine compares to superdrol itself. If I ever get my hands on dimethazine, I will run that experiment for the sake of the community and see how both compounds compare, even though they're, well, basically the same thing, but one is a prohormone of the other one, and maybe that alters the pharmacodynamics and the overall results slightly. So for now, I'm just going to stick to the prohormones that I'm already taking, being the testosterone enanthate, methanolyl enanthate, nandrolone decanoate, DHEA, and pregnenolone. Anavar is not a prohormone, but I'm still taking it for its collagen synthesis benefits. Let's discuss the designer steroids and what designer steroids actually are. Basically, all testosterone derivatives, whether those are dihydrotestosterone derivatives or nortestosterone derivatives, all of those are designer steroids. They were designed to get additional benefits over testosterone itself, whether that's less androgenicity or more anabolism or a combination of both, which is generally considered to be ideal and a suitable replacement for testosterone, which should still form the foundation of all of your cycles because testosterone metabolizes into estradiol and you need some estradiol for all its physiological benefits. So basically all other steroids besides testosterone itself, all of the synthetic stuff that we like to take for the sake of bodybuilding, those are all designer steroids. And most of the prohormones back in the day were actually designer steroids. So when you look at superdrol, for example, that's a designer steroid. It was designed at the same time that mastrone, dromostanolone was designed, or anadrol oxymetholone was designed. Mastrone and anadrol were FDA approved, but superdrol wasn't. Now you could say that turinabol is the original, the OG designer steroid because turinabol was specifically designed for athletes competing for Germany in the Olympics or other international sports. And even though these athletes didn't know they were taking anabolic androgenic steroids because it was labeled as dietary supplements, sounds familiar? That's exactly what happened with the prohormones and designer steroids being sold over the counter at GNC. Let's start with the most famous designer steroid of them all, albeit that it's completely unsourceable nowadays. A designer steroid designed by the community for the community in order to circumvent the drug testing of its time, TetraHydroGestrinone, abbreviated to THG, also known as the Clear. The Clear was designed by Patrick Arnold to help circumvent drug testing in a multitude of different sports. It was produced at Belco under supervision of Victor Conte, but once Barry Bonds and several other athletes started failing for drug testing, the whole thing blew up and the scandal of Belco came out that they were actually supplying steroids to athletes. Now, unfortunately, I can't find any anecdotal reports from bodybuilders or anybody else in the fitness community or other sports for that matter that has personal experience with this compound. I can't find any of it. So for now, I'm just going to say that it's not worth it because I don't see anybody raving about the Clear in any way, shape, or form. That being said, the Clear clearly was able to break plateaus, set new records at the Olympics and other sports where it was readily used, but only by athletes who were very close with Victor Conte or Patrick Arnold and got their Clear through Belco. So it's a very small and tight-knit community that was actually able to use this compound. Well, at least until Trevor Graham delivered a syringe containing trace amounts of Clear to the United States Anti-Doping Agency, after which USADA was able to determine that this sample contained TetraHydroGestrinone using mass spectrometry. They developed a doping test, after which a lot of athletes started to fail. And I believe that the last known case of people failing for the Clear TetraHydroGestrinone was in 2006 or 2007. But I could be mistaken here because there are so many doping cases over a multitude of different sports, and it's very hard to come by an entire list of all the known doping cases of people failing for the clear. So I believe that the last known case of people failing for the clear is 2006 or 2007, and it hasn't been used since. And it hasn't been available since. So I can't really find too much information about it. All that I'm able to piece together is that the clear is a modification of gestrinone, as the name implies, TetraHydroGestrinone. It's also a synthetic estrane and 17-alpha-alkylated nandrolone derivative with similarities to trenbolone, metribolone, and norbolitone, considering its very high affinity for the androgen receptor, which is ultimately a good thing. That's something you would want out of a steroid. That can also mean that when you combine the clear with testosterone, the clear binds to the androgen receptor tightly, preventing testosterone to bind, causing a lot of aromatization of testosterone into estradiol. And it's a progestogenic 19-nortestosterone derivative, which could potentially further or worsen the aromatization of testosterone into estradiol, similar to how nandrolone potentiates that effect. Again, there's not so much evidence of the clear worsening aromatization of testosterone, so I'm just purely speculating here. Keep in mind that the clear also has a very high affinity for the glucocorticoid receptors. In some instances, there was reported to be significant weight loss. And again, since it has overlapping effects with the progesterone receptor, all of that combined, I would say that this compound is not worth it in any way, shape, or form. And it was only used at that time to beat the drug test. And since there's now a doping test, a detection method for all of the known steroid derivatives out there, the only thing you can really look into is the detection times and befriending your doping officer so you can pass the sample instead. Let's move over to Bolasterone, which is double methylated testosterone at the 7-alpha and 17-alpha position. Bolasterone shouldn't be mistaken for blastoids. That's something entirely different. But if you go with the anecdotal reports, and I was able to find 2 whole whopping anecdotal reports buried deep down into the steroid forums posted over a decade ago, Bolasterone does make you look like a blastoid. So keep that in mind if you're able to source this compound, which I can't find anywhere, not on anybody's source list, not on any of the raw providers. Bolasterone does have its practical applications, but it seems to be unobtainable. From what I read, Bolasterone gives you the fullness and the pumps of Dianabol, but the hardness and a little bit of aggression similar to halotestin. So long story short, we have Superdrol nowadays. So if you want to use Bolasterone but get the Dianabol fullness and the hardness of halotestin, just look into Superdrol instead. Now, a long time ago in a steroid era far away, Bolasterone was available under the brand name Myagen and Methozarb. And I believe it was also sold by Dan Duchaine, but it turned out that the product that Dan Duchaine sold in the 80s was faked with testosterone and nandrolone. So again, are these anecdotal reports that I've read about Bolasterone based on faked compounds sold by Dan Duchaine in the 80s? I'm not entirely sure. So this is pretty much where the story ends. The 2 anecdotal reports that I was able to read say that it's a combination of Dianabol and halotestin, whereas in reality nowadays we have Superdrol to fulfill something similar. So I would say that Bolasterone is not worth it. Still, Bolasterone does look like an interesting compound chemically and structurally speaking. I mean, we're all familiar with the results that you would get from good old-fashioned testosterone itself. I've read some anecdotal reports of methylated testosterone, people getting good results out of that, even though the liver toxicity that methyl testosterone potentiates is quite substantial. So imagine the amount of liver toxicity and potential results you would get from double methylated testosterone. Speaking about methylated testosterone, let's move over to M1T, methyl 1-testosterone, also known as methylated dihydroboldenone. A lot of you guys actually posted your anecdotal reports in the comment section of the previous Worth It or Not video. So thank you guys so much for your contributions there. It seems that the consensus is pretty much uniform. Methyl 1-testosterone is a very potent oral, but also highly liver toxic. Now again, you have methylated boldenone in the form of Dianabol, and you have methylated dihydroboldenone in the form of methyl 1-testosterone, which is still available in some of the sources, and you can even buy the raw powders online. So there is a demand for it. There are people that are using methyl-1 testosterone, but it seems that the best way to run it is maybe once, 2 times, or 3 times per week to bring up lagging body parts. And this is a very similar approach to how I would cycle Anadrol or Superdrol, which seems to work extremely well if you're trying to bring up weaker body parts during the off-season where you're eating a ton of foods and, of course, shuttling micronutrients in with the use of insulin or IGF-1 or stimulating IGF-1 production with the use of growth hormone. Right? As long as everything is shuttling into the muscle, allowing for hyperplasia and hypertrophy, a single administration pre-workout, right? So the full dose pre-workouts of Anadrol, Superdrol, or in this case, methyl-1 testosterone seems to be highly beneficial to bring up weaker body parts and provide strength acutely. Now, going by the anecdotal reports online, I don't really see people comparing M1T to Anadrol or Superdrol. But the results and the effects and the side effects that they get are very similar to Anadrol and Superdrol. So I'm not entirely sure if these anecdotal reports are people actually using Anadrol or Superdrol, or maybe a combination of both. So I'm not entirely sure how much value I can take from these anecdotal reports. Myself personally, I haven't used M1T after doing a lot of research on boldenone, dihydroboldenone, Dianabol, and now M1T. I'm not really interested in running it. I don't see a reason to make the switch from using Anadrol or Superdrol and replace that with methyl-1 testosterone in the context of bringing up weaker body parts or to restore fullness leading into a contest or photo shoot, which is where Anadrol and Superdrol really shines. And also keep in mind that this group of steroids, the boldenone, the Dianabol, the dihydroboldenone, and the methyl-1 testosterone, are all linked either to neurotoxicity or kidney toxicity, or both. I was able to find a study about methyl-1 testosterone being linked to acute kidney injury. I'll link it down below, but this was in combination with Ciclosporin. Now, unlike boldenone, which has a ton of literature behind it that it's acutely kidney toxic, and Dianabol being neurotoxic, I was only able to find one study, but that could also mean that a lot of the studies performed on boldenone and Dianabol have not been performed on methyl-1 testosterone. So please proceed with caution. Still, there's a lot of supporters of methyl-1 testosterone. People say that they prefer it as their sole oral of choice for strength or for pumps or for both, right? That's ideally what you want. You want phenomenal strength and a phenomenal pump. M1T has its loyal supporters. It is available. Personally, I would say that it's not worth it, but I'll leave it up to you. If you're the kind of guy that likes Dianabol or Anadrol or Superdrol, maybe methyl-1 testosterone is something you can try. And again, make sure you do your research because it does seem that methyl-1 testosterone is pretty rough on your liver. I have several videos discussing how to sustain your liver health while using oral steroids. I'll link them at the end of this one. Make sure you watch those videos first. Have your NAC and TUDCA and whatever else in place before you start cycling M1T orally. And otherwise take it sublingually, which could mitigate a little bit of the liver toxicity. Moving over to Epistane, which is how a lot of enhanced bodybuilders got their steroid cherry popped back in the day. Epistane is the methylated version of Epistane sold under the brand name Theodrol, which is a breast cancer medication exclusive to Japan, where it's used as an anti-estrogen as well as an anti-neoplastic agent. Epistane agonizes or activates the androgen receptors, potentiating mild anabolic activity, and simultaneously antagonizes or deactivates the estrogen receptors. And this is how Epistane is classified as an anabolic agent with anti-estrogenic properties. Now, whereas Epistane Thiodrol is only available as an injectable medication in Japan, its oral methylated counterpart, the designer steroid Epistane, is only available on the underground lab scene. Even though it's methylated, these anti-estrogenic properties of Thiodrol transfer into Epistane. And this is where you see a lot of the anecdotal reports kind of fall into the same picture as you see with Winstrol. And even though some people say that Epistane is more potent than Winstrol, or a little bit less potent than Winstrol. Now, of course, there's a lot of dose dependency, dose discrepancy, and quality of product that plays into this comparison of the anecdotal reports, heavily comparing Epistane to Winstrol. Still, the results are pretty uniform from what I've read. Within the first week of Epistane use, you notice that you get drier, you look leaner, you get stronger, more vascular. All the good stuff starts to happen. Then by week 2, your elbows and knees start to get a little bit squeaky. So you start flexing and then you get this cracking effect, which isn't very pleasant. And then by week 3, what everybody reports is that their body is made of glass. So that's something you should definitely take note of. Epistane, if you do want to use it, the only real practical application that there is for it is leading up to a contest. Whereas with Winstrol use, you can use that for 6 weeks in duration. And even though the joint drying effects start to manifest from week 2, they seem to be more tolerable compared to Epistane. Whereas after 2 weeks, you start to feel like glass. Keep in mind that Epistane is not sustainable at all. Again, the joint drying out effects, the anti-estrogenic effects, are pretty much immediate. So you would only be able to use this leading into a contest, not for any strength event, because you will dry out your joints so severely that you're risking muscle tears. 1 week or 2 weeks at maximum. And that being said, I've never ever spoken with a bodybuilder backstage that looked absolutely fleeky, dry and hard, and had a little bit of these cracky elbows and spine when they were flexing. I've met those guys, but they were always overdoing the anti-estrogens, megadosing the letrozole, for example. Then you do a back double bicep, and your entire spine starts cracking. That's how dry these guys were. So I go over and ask, what have you been doing? Maybe share a little bit of secrets, insider trading, sort of say. Guess what? Nobody mentions Epistane. Nobody mentions it. Really, I've never heard any competitive bodybuilder say that they got that dry due to Epistane or that they were using Epistane at all, whether that's during the off-season or a contest prep. I don't think I've ever talked to anybody that favored Epistane for whatever purpose. I've read a lot of anecdotal reports online, but I've never met anybody that used it themselves for the sake of a contest prep or during the off-season to gain strength once in a while. And when I look at the pharmacodynamics and how this compound interacts with the androgen and estrogen receptor, I would say that's the only practical application for Epistane. 2 weeks leading into a contest to get as dry as possible. Now, you have to be super careful when you train on Epistane because of its joint drying effects and its anti-estrogenic effects. And you need estrogen for collagen synthesis. You need estrogen for favorable lipids. You need estrogen for neuroprotection. You need estrogen to help with your blood pressure to a certain extent. So keep that in mind. Epistane in 2 weeks will undo all of the positive effects that you would get from estradiol, and you might as well take your testosterone out so you can get a similar effect. Now, you don't have this liver burden, this methylation, this additional stress by taking an oral steroid. If you want to do something anti-estrogenic, take the testosterone out and then use another oral in the form of Anavar or maybe a Superdrol, which again is one of my favorite oral steroids. I would look into incorporating these DHT derivatives instead, while simultaneously discontinuing the testosterone 2 weeks, 3 weeks, 4 weeks, leading into the contest, allowing your serum estradiol levels to come down slowly, ending up at subclinical levels. But instead of using an anti-estrogen blocking the estrogen receptors, your serum estradiol levels will be subclinical. You get plenty of anabolism from the Anavar or the Superdrol or the Anadrol, for example, allowing you to stay anabolic without these joint drying effects, without these anti-estrogenic effects, causing you to crack all of your bones when doing particular poses. It's not very pleasant, and it's certainly not good for your blood work. So instead, look into removing your testosterone at a particular point in time and adding in particular oral steroids, which are not classified as typical anti-estrogenics. You still have somewhat subclinical estradiol levels, but they're not zero. But you don't potentiate any of this joint drying or other negative and deleterious effects of an anti-estrogen. And now that I think of it, maybe you should only try Epistane when you're using nandrolone to somewhat protect your joints with progestogenic activity and increase the synovial fluid within your joints as you're building up this Epistane days over the course of 2 weeks or so. Not that you're building up the dose, but with every day of Epistane administration, your joints get drier and drier and drier. So maybe it's best to have nandrolone in the picture to protect your joints, keep the synovial fluid there to a certain extent. And again, I think there's a lot of more suitable anabolic androgenic steroids in oral form available, which are not going to wreck your serum lipids or your liver panel, send those liver enzymes to the moon and beyond. A lot of suitable compounds out there that you can choose from before trying Epistane. I know some of you guys tried it and loved it. Maybe use it occasionally or frequently. Again, please keep track of your liver enzymes because it seems that Epistane, just like many of the prohormones and designer steroids, are really, really, really harsh on your liver. From my personal opinion, I would say that Epistane is not worth it. If you feel that Epistane is worth it, let us know down below in the comment section. I'll leave it here. The next video is going to be a deep dive about DHEA and pregnenolone. A lot of you guys have requested it now. I'm almost done with my research. Again, I think that DHEA and pregnenolone are mandatory. So if you didn't get convinced from the previous video, the next video certainly will. Thank you guys so much for watching. You can find everything that I'm associated with down below in the description section. Follow me on Instagram and TikTok at VigorSteve. Vigorous crew, you guys know what to do. A front double bicep for you guys. Is there any Epistane in this picture? Let's try. Sounds pretty smooth. So that's the nandrolone, keeping my joints nicely lubricated. I'll leave it here. Thank you guys so much for watching, and I'll see you in the next video.